Bay of Honduras, autumn 1822. The ship slows. The coast comes into view. James Hasty stands at the rail with his wife and their 2 children. He has the guidebook open. He's been reading it for weeks, all 355 pages. He knows what he's looking for. He is looking for a city. The guidebook promised fine bridges, a cathedral with a domed roof, public buildings of cut stone, a bank of Poyais with its columns visible from the harbor, a thriving British-speaking community that would welcome the settlers like neighbors long expected. He lowers the book. The coast is silent, dense green, unbroken in every direction. No dock, no buildings, no smoke from chimneys, no sound except the birds and the water. He looks down at the guidebook, then back at the shore. He closes it. The anchor drops. The longboats go over the side. They row toward the jungle. They found the ruins of an old British settlement a few hundred yards in. A graveyard mostly, swallowed back into the vegetation. Stone markers tilted at angles. The names half legible. The dates from a different generation. The city wasn't there. Then the weather changed. A hurricane came in off the water. Both ships, their only way back, were carried out to sea. The city had never been there. They were stranded on a coast that was real, with a guidebook that wasn't, and no way home. Within weeks, the first people started dying. Fewer than 50 of the roughly 250 settlers who landed in Poyais made it back to Britain alive. More than 150 did not. Elderly men and women who had come to retire in paradise, dying on a beach, watching fires they kept burning as distress signals. James Hasty lost 2 of his children there. The man who sold them Poyais was Gregor MacGregor, Scottish soldier, general, war hero, self-styled cacique of Poyais, prince, in the Castilian he used when the title served him. Poyais wasn't a place. It was paperwork that people treated like geography. MacGregor had invented it. Flag, currency, parliament, coat of arms, government bonds, an entire 355-page guidebook, and sold it to British families who trusted every printed word. He raised the equivalent of an estimated £1 billion in modern money, caused 2 London banks to collapse, contributed to the worst financial panic Britain had seen in a generation, and years later, he would still be treated like a man who had done nothing wrong. The ending of this story is James Hasty's book. On deck, as the coast came into view, a man laughed, nervous, and said, "Maybe the harbor's around the bend." Someone else nodded too quickly. This story isn't about the lie. It's about that nod. MacGregor understood it before any of them boarded. A lie told with enough effort becomes something people protect. The guidebook, the bonds, the parliament, the coat of arms with the Poyais and unicorns, those were the effort. That nod was the result, even from themselves. To understand Poyais, you have to understand what MacGregor was before it, because the fraud wasn't built from nothing. It was built from something real. Christmas Eve, 1786. Gregor MacGregor born at Glengyle, on the north shore of Loch Katrina, Scotland. Clan Gregor, a family that had been legally prescribed, forbidden to use their own surname for nearly 2 centuries. The prescription lifted only 12 years before his birth. His father died when he was 8. In London, years from now, he will call himself a prince. The rooms he's being shown into now are practice. 1803, 16 years old. Purchased a commission as ensign. Promoted to lieutenant in under a year. This normally took 3. He was developing a reputation, obsessed with dress, with rank insignia, with medals. He forbade any enlisted man from leaving quarters in anything less than full-dress uniform. He doesn't need a country yet. He needs paperwork that looks like one. He's learning what that requires. He purchased his way up to captain, then back to Britain, styling himself colonel, then Sir Gregor MacGregor, baronet, claimed clan chieftainship, alluded at dinner parties to connections with dukes and earls he may or may not have had. He married Maria Bowater, daughter of an admiral, substantial dowry, social connections that opened rooms otherwise closed. When Maria died in late 1811, he lost both the income and the network. The performance suddenly had no stage. On that beach in Honduras, James Hasty is still reading the guidebook, still turning pages, as if the city might appear if he reads harder. Early 1812, he sold his small Scottish estate and sailed for South America, arriving in Caracas shortly after an earthquake had devastated the city. As a former British officer, and he made sure everyone knew his connection to the regiment, he was received with enthusiasm by General Francisco de Miranda, who gave him command of a cavalry battalion. He married again, Josefa Aristeguieta y Lovera, daughter of a prominent Caracas family, cousin of Simón Bolívar. The connection was real, the rank was real, the war was real. The guidebook is already being written in his head. It will take years before there's ink. And then came the thing that made everything else possible. 1816. Venezuela. Our royalist forces had broken Bolívar's main army. MacGregor was assigned to recruit native tribesmen west of Caracas, then cut off, isolated, with 2 pursuing royalist armies behind him and hundreds of miles of jungle between him and the nearest Republican stronghold at Barcelona. No carts, a handful of horses. Wounded men, he was forced to leave where they fell. He resolved to march. 1,200 men, mostly native archers, men who had followed him into a war not their own, through territory held by people trying to kill them. 34 days. On August 10th, the Spanish cavalry caught up. MacGregor deployed his archers behind a marsh and stream. The cavalry bogged. The infantry came in and was repelled. After 3 hours, MacGregor charged. The royalists broke. He arrived in Barcelona on August 20th, 1816. Bolívar wrote to him afterward, "The retreat which you had the honor to conduct is, in my opinion, superior to the conquest of an empire. Biographers called it the Xenophon of the Americas." MacGregor was promoted to divisional general and awarded the Orden de los Libertadores. This was not invention. This was not performance. This happened. A man who could march 1,200 soldiers through 34 days of jungle pursuit and arrive, that man existed. MacGregor had been that man, once, briefly, completely. Everything that followed was the attempt to keep being him, because what came after Barcelona was something else. Florida, 1817. Rio de la Hacha, 1819. Each time, soldiers took a town without him, Spanish forces massed, MacGregor issued proclamations and distributed decorations, boarded a ship, and left. At Rio de la Hacha, General Eyre and all troops were killed, but Portobello was the one that lasted in the telling. 1819. His troops took the town without him. He was still in bed when the Spanish retook it. He threw his blankets from the window onto the beach, jumped after them, tried to paddle to the ships on a log, passed out, had to be rescued, then ordered the fleet to sea, abandoning 200 men. Colonel Rafter, left behind, was later shot with 11 other officers. Bolívar ordered MacGregor's death by hanging if he ever set foot on South American soil again. Michael Rafter published a biography in 1820. He predicted no one could ever be induced to follow Gregor MacGregor again. He was spectacularly wrong, because MacGregor understood something about the gap between who he had been at Barcelona and who he had shown himself to be at Portobello. The man who survived the gap was not the one who closed it. He was the one who made the gap invisible. April 1820. MacGregor appeared at the court of King George Frederick Augustus of the Mosquito Coast, the Mosquito people of the Gulf of Honduras, politically aligned with Britain since the 17th century. Their chieftain ceremonially crowned by the British to obstruct Spanish territorial claims. On April 29, 1820, King George Frederick Augustus signed a document. It granted MacGregor and his heirs 8 million acres, 12,500 square miles, an area larger than Wales. In exchange, rum and jewelry. 8 million acres traded like a favor. Because London had no way to check, MacGregor had his country. He needed London to say the word Poyais like it had always existed. Now he had to build it. London, 1821. He returned calling himself the Cacique of Poyais, a Spanish-American word for native chief. He used it to mean prince. On paper, it sat on the Mosquito Coast. Real land, no city. Then he built a country, not a sketch, not a suggestion, a country. A tricameral parliament with its constitutional arrangements written out in full. A coat of arms doubly supported by poyers and unicorns. Distinctive military uniforms for each regiment of the Poyusian army. An honors system with landed titles attached. Order of the Green Cross, recycled from his Florida adventure with its green cross on white field. 70,000 banknotes printed as Bank of Poyais dollars. A Poyasian legation office at Dowgate Hill in the City of London. Offices in London, Edinburgh, and more in Glasgow selling land certificates, initially 2 shillings 3 pence per acre, raised without diminishing sales, eventually reaching 4 shillings. He hired clerks, printed seals, answered correspondence. MacGregor received an official reception at Guildhall from the Lord Mayor of London. In a City of London counting house, a clerk stamped a transfer of funds to the Poyasian legation. The stamp came down. The ink blot spread across the page. He didn't look up. Somewhere else, a different clerk copied the word Poyais into a register without asking how to spell it. At a dinner in Mayfair, a guest repeated the word cazique carefully, getting the pronunciation right, as if it were a place he'd heard of and should know. A banker reviewed the bond prospectus, noted the underwriting by Sir John Perring, Shaw, Barber and Company, and nodded. A letter arrived at the Dowgate Hill legation office addressed to the government of Poyais. It was accepted and signed for. Nobody sent a letter to Honduras to check. MacGregor hired people to sing songs about Poyais in the streets, distribute handbills. The name moved through the city. Now he just had to put the lie in people's hands. Then came the guidebook. Sketch of the Mosquito Shore, including the territory of Poyais, descriptive of the country, with some information as to its production, the best mode of culture, etc. Chiefly intended for the use of settlers. Published 1822, W. Blackwood, Edinburgh, under the name Thomas Strangeways, a fictional author who had, apparently, spent years in Poyais and wished to share what he had learned. 355 pages, thick paper, crisp type, a binding that creaked like a ledger. The capital city, St. Joseph. Fine bridges, a domed cathedral, a bank of Poyais with stone columns visible from the water, public buildings, a thriving British-speaking mercantile community already established, waiting for new arrivals, a temperate climate perfectly suited to European settlers, farmland capable of producing 3 crops per year. The cost of professional printing and binding ran to a sum that could not easily be dismissed. No one goes to this expense for a joke. The production quality of the lie was itself the argument for its truth. In Edinburgh, James Hastie opened sketch of the Mosquito Shore for the first time. He read the description of St. Joseph, the bridges, the cathedral, the columns visible from the harbor. He read it again. He had savings. He had a family. He had been looking for somewhere to take them. He wasn't chasing a dream. He was chasing a guarantee. He turned to the next page. October 1822. First bond issue, £200,000. Backed by all revenues of the government of Poyais. Underwritten by a notable London bank. Sir John Perring, Shaw, Barber and Company. South American bonds were fashionable. New republics forming constantly across the continent. Poyaisian bonds appeared no more unusual than Colombia's, Chile's, Peru's. No telegram, no photographs, no proof. By early 1823, approximately 500 people had bought Poyasian land certificates. Many had invested their entire savings. Before departure, settlers were required to exchange their British pounds for Bank of Poyais dollars. The exchange was mandatory. It was also, structurally, the lock on the door. Once the currency was exchanged, the investment was total. James Hastie exchanged his sterling. He had the guidebook. He had the land certificate. He had the Bank of Poyais dollars in his coat. He boarded with his wife and their children. The hurricane arrived before they had finished unloading their supplies. Wind first. A sound like canvas tearing across the whole sky. Then the rain came sideways, and someone on deck was shouting a name, a child's name. And the sound disappeared into the water before it arrived anywhere. The ships pulled against their anchor lines. Then the lines went slack. The ships moved. The coastline stayed. Within minutes, they were gone, both of them, carried out together on the same current, becoming smaller, becoming nothing. This single fact, that the vessel carrying their goods and the vessel that had brought them both disappeared in the same storm, collapsed the future and the present into the same moment. They had not yet established themselves on shore. They had already lost the means to leave. They were on a coast that had nothing, and they were staying. Roughly 250 settlers between the two ships that arrived, the Honduras packet in autumn 1822, the Kennersley Castle in early 1823, with its 180 additional passengers who arrived to find the bedraggled survivors of the first voyage still on the beach. Yellow fever, malaria, food running out. The guidebook had described farmland capable of 3 crops per year. The actual land was largely unfit for cultivation. At some point, the exact week doesn't survive in the records, the settlers made a decision, whether to move inland, where the jungle might yield something to eat, or to stay visible on the beach where rescue ships, if any came, could find them. Moving inland meant survival odds. Staying meant remaining findable. They stayed. They kept the fires burning. Some of them died waiting. Edward Lowe, one of the survivors, wrote afterward, "Not one was able to assist another out of such a number, and many of those who had newly come from Scotland were well advanced in years and had come here to end their days in peace and comfort. Shallow graves, children gone within days. Fires kept burning on the beach for months, visible from the water, hoping someone would come. Someone eventually did, a British rescue vessel from Belize. Fewer than 50 survivors returned to Britain in October 1823. They looked, a Scottish newspaper reported, ghastly and cadaverous. Evidently, the paper said, as though they had undergone extreme suffering and illness. MacGregor had already left for Paris. London press reported the Poyais scandal devastatingly. The Times confirmed the fraud on August 20th, 1823. 2 additional ships diverted from their Poyais voyages by Royal Navy warning. The story was complete in the papers before the survivors arrived home. MacGregor, questioned through intermediaries, did not admit any wrongdoing. He calmly insisted the settlers had been dropped at the wrong location. Poyais was as real and beautiful as he had always said, if only they had been taken to the right spot. October 22nd, 1823, 10 days after the survivors arrived in Britain. 6 of them, including James Hastie, who had buried 2 of his children on that coast, signed an affidavit. The affidavit did not accuse MacGregor. It blamed Colonel Hall, MacGregor's agent, for the disaster. It stated in the survivors' own words that they believed Sir Gregor MacGregor had been worse used by Colonel Hall and his other agents than was ever a man before, and that had they done their duty by Sir Gregor and by us, that things would have turned out very differently at Poyais. 6 people who had watched children die in jungle mud signed a document defending the man who put them there. The system, the press, the returning testimony of survivors, the physical evidence of the coast itself had produced truth. And the truth was not enough, because here is what the truth required of James Hastie. It required him to accept that the man whose guidebook he had read for weeks on the voyage, whose currency he had exchanged, that man had fabricated it entirely, that every sentence of those 355 pages was a lie, that the city he had brought his children to find had never existed, that his children had died not by accident, not by misfortune, not by any failure of duty from an agent, but because a man in London had printed a beautiful book describing a country he invented, and Hastie had believed it, that his judgment had killed his children. The alternative, that the plan was real, that betrayal came from below, that if only MacGregor himself had come, things would have been different, preserved something more necessary than the truth. It preserved the possibility that he had not been a fool. MacGregor had built this into the structure, not deliberately perhaps, or perhaps entirely deliberately. The more elaborate the lie, the more completely it transferred the cost of disbelief onto the person deceived. The 355 pages, the currency, the parliament, the coat of arms, the honored reception at Guildhall, none of it was incidental. On each layer was a burden placed in advance on the person who would later need to admit they had trusted it. He didn't just want a country, he wanted the version of himself that deserved one. Hastie published a book, Narrative of a Voyage in the Ship Kennersley Castle from Leith Roads to Poyais. It blamed MacGregor's advisors, the agents who had spread false information, the subordinates who had failed to carry out the cazique's intentions. A group of survivors signed a declaration. Had Sir Gregor gone with them, things would have turned out differently. A man who lost 2 children in a jungle that should have been a city, writing a book that defended the city's architect. This is the thing that has lasted, not the bonds, not the scandal in the papers, not the ships turned back by the Navy. The question this story leaves, the one that doesn't resolve, is whether Hasty knew, whether somewhere in the months between burying his children on the Mosquito Coast and sitting down to write his defense of Gregor MacGregor, he understood, at some level that couldn't be acknowledged, exactly what he was doing. Whether he chose the lie because the truth was unbearable, or whether the lie had become, by then, the only truth he had left. The London scandal had not crossed the Channel. That was all MacGregor needed. He arrived in Paris in late 1823 with the same documents, the same title, the same story. In Paris, the name Poyais had no wreckage attached to it yet. He raised close to £300,000 from French investors who had heard, apparently, of the charming and distinguished cacique of Poyais. He didn't need to build anything new. He just moved to a market where the truth hadn't arrived yet. He wasn't running from the law. He was outrunning the news. While MacGregor was selling Poyais in Paris, Hasty's book was going to press in Edinburgh. The lie had two lives now, deployed and defended simultaneously by different hands on different continents. Neither man needed the other. The fiction was running itself. And French government officials grew suspicious when people began requesting passports to travel to a country no official registry had heard of. They seized a Nouvelle Industrie vessel in Le Havre. MacGregor was arrested, tried April 6, 1826. He claimed good faith, legitimate land grant, unfortunate circumstances. From prison, he issued a declaration, held contrary to human rights, suffering as one of the founders of independence in the New World. MacGregor, acquitted, not vindicated, just unproven. He returned to London in 1827. On the docks, or in the coffee houses, or however the news reached him, he found that other people had been selling Poyais while he was in prison. Rival fraudsters, independently, by the acre. The territory he had invented had become so fixed in public consciousness that the scheme ran without him. Pamphlet warning investors about Poyais that year made no mention of MacGregor at all. The fiction had outlasted the fiction maker. He was no longer necessary to his own lie. He continued issuing land certificates anyway. A certificate signed by MacGregor from 1830 survives, held today by the British Antique Dealers Association. Even after the scheme had outgrown him, he kept signing. The institutional damage settled across years. The bank that had underwritten the Poyaisian bonds, Sir John Paring, Shaw, Barber and Company, collapsed in 1826. It was not alone. 73 bank failures total. The Bank of England's reserves came close to exhaustion. A fictional country had borrowed, for a time, at nearly the same rate as real ones. When the fiction ended, the real ones fell with it. The man who built the fiction lived another 18 years. MacGregor moved to Venezuela, the country where Bolivar, now 8 years dead, had once ordered him hanged on sight. Bolivar's former allies remembered the march to Barcelona. They restored his rank, granted a pension, conferred citizenship. The fraud, apparently, did not travel. December 4th, 1845. Gregor MacGregor died in Caracas, aged 58. Full military honors, buried in Caracas Cathedral. A fraud that didn't stop at money. More than 150 people dead. 2 banks collapsed. 73 total failures. An entire nation invented and populated with living people who were sent to die in it. And at the end, a cathedral, a general's funeral, a country that received him as a hero. The Bank of Poyais dollar, one of the 70,000 printed, is held at the Smithsonian Institution's National Numismatic Collection in Washington, D.C. 1830 Poyaisian land certificate, signed by MacGregor, is held by the British Antique Dealers Association. The guidebook, all 355 pages, survives in several editions. These objects outlasted everyone who believed in them. The settlers who exchanged their sterling for Poyais dollars and never came back. The elderly men and women who wanted to retire in peace and were buried instead in mud. James Hasty's 2 children. They outlasted Hasty himself, who published his book and signed his affidavits and went to his grave with whatever he had decided to believe. James Hasty's book does not accuse Gregor MacGregor of anything. It is not clear, reading it, whether this is because Hasty believed MacGregor was innocent or because he had decided to. It is not clear whether those are different things. The guidebook is still in print.